Hello, let's discuss few more motivation theories. In this one, I will cover the reinforcement theory, the goal setting theory, the implications of those theories, and some more stuff. In my last video, I covered the need-based motivation theories, and there are many more motivation theories that I am not covering in this lecture. I will cover some of them in later lectures, especially when for example, I will discuss the expectancy theory of motivation, a very important theory of motivation, not now, but later on in context of one of the leadership theories, specifically the path goal theory of leadership. So, which builds on the expectancy theory of motivation. So in interest of time, I will combine them together and not speak about that theory here. Similarly, there are certain other theories that I will touch upon, but still I will not be able to cover all the theories that exist on motivation, of course, because that's a huge topic and completely beyond the scope of one or two lectures that I'm doing on motivation. The first theory that we will discuss is the reinforcement theory. For those who have background in psychology may know it as operant conditioning, proposed by B.F. Skinner and his contemporaries. I won't go into the history here in too much of detail. But the reinforcement theory or the operant conditioning is often described in many textbooks as part of the learning theories, how people learn through rewards and punishments. And that's correct, nothing wrong with that. But the reinforcement theory can also be viewed as a theory of motivation. So how does it answer the motivation question? So what motivates people? It's rewards and punishments. People are motivated to work towards getting rewards, things that they value, things that they love, things that they desire. And people are motivated to avoid punishments, anything that is unpleasant. So that's the carrot and the stick. You are motivated to seek carrots and you are motivated to get away from or avoid punishments. So that's the reinforcement theory in its essence. But of course, there's much more than that. Uh, One can actually have a full semester worth of course only on the reinforcement theory and its applications. In fact, that's what I had during my education, because I got a professional degree in a certain discipline where I had one full semester worth of course on what is called behavior modification, how to modify people's behavior using rewards and punishments. So that's a lot of depth that one can go into when it comes to reinforcement theory and its application, and when to apply and how to apply this theory. One can go into a lot of depth, which of course would be beyond the scope of this lecture, but I will still cover some of the important aspects of this theory, and then you, using your own initiative, should be able to learn things further and apply the theory into your own lives. So let's understand the reinforcement theory through this flowchart. It starts with the antecedents. Antecedents are the conditions leading to a behavior, things that are happening in the environment that trigger a certain behavior. For example, your dad may ask you to clean the dishes. So your dad's directive, your dad's instruction becomes the antecedent for you to engage in the behavior of cleaning the dishes. So cleaning the dishes becomes your behavior, and it was triggered by your dad's order to clean the dishes. Otherwise, probably you would not have cleaned the dishes, right? So that's the trigger. What happens after you engage in the behavior is actually covered under operant conditioning or reinforcement theory. Strictly speaking, the before part, The antecedent part is covered under classical conditioning. But we won't try to separate those things here, because in behavior modification, from a very practical perspective, we are combining everything. So in behavior modification, we take into account antecedents, behavior, also the consequences. In any case, the behavior of cleaning the dishes, when it is followed by a pleasant consequence, something that you find pleasurable, like you getting appreciation from your parents, or you getting monetary reward, will increase the chances of you repeating that behavior. So this behavior of cleaning the dishes, the probability that you will repeat that behavior increases. And that is what we call is operant conditioning. If the behavior is followed by some kind of unpleasant consequence, then the behavior chances of getting repeated decreases. So anything followed by a pleasant consequence, the behavior is reinforced, or in other words, strengthened. That's the reason it is called reinforcement theory. The probability of that behavior getting repeated increases. Any behavior followed by a consequence that you find unpleasant, that you find undesirable, will decrease the probability of you repeating that behavior. In other words, the behavior gets weakened. Clear? So let's say you broke some glasses while washing the dishes, and your mom gets angry because of that. Theoretically speaking, at least, and you, let's say, get punished, and then, which means you will be more careful while washing the dishes next time. You will not engage in the behavior of dropping, valuable cutlery and breaking them. Clear? So any behavior followed by a pleasant consequence leads to strengthening of that behavior. Any behavior followed by an unpleasant consequence leads to weakening of that behavior. That is what we call is reinforcement theory. It's very simple, but has profound implications, both from the leadership perspective, as well as from the perspective of the employee, as well as from the perspective of the individual person, the subordinate. Because we all are seeking some rewards. We want certain things in our lives. We are avoiding certain things. We don't want unpleasant things to happen in our lives, right? So biologically speaking, we are very hedonistic individuals. So what motivates us then is that we engage in behaviors that will give us more pleasure, give us more pleasant consequences, more rewards, things that we find rewarding. And we will also engage in behaviors that will avoid situations of we feeling unhappy, unpleasant, or being punished. So you may work hard, you may be motivated on your job to avoid losing your job. Okay? Or you may work hard to get a promotion or to get a raise on your job. So your motivation then is being explained by your perception of how your behavior, your work will impact the probability of you getting rewards that you value, and the probability of you not getting punishments or not getting the things that you don't like to have in your life, like losing your job or getting a demotion. Okay, so that's in essence what reinforcement theory is. So in this slide, you can see some of the basic assumptions in reinforcement theory, pretty self-explanatory, so you should be able to understand it on your own. I will focus more on the technical aspect here, on the types of reinforcement. This is a little technical, so I think I need to explain that a little bit more. There are four basic types, And the first one is positive reinforcement or reward. Simple words, reward. Any behavior followed by a reward or pleasant consequence will lead to the strengthening of that behavior or will increase the likelihood of you repeating that behavior. That's what positive reinforcement is. For example, if you reward a child with, say, some candies after she finishes her math worksheet, then she will be motivated to work on math problems again in the future, right? That is positive reinforcement. Or your dog extends her paw and you reward the dog with a treat, then the dog will be motivated to extend her paw or his paw anytime that you ask for the dog's paw. So that is positive reinforcement. Simple. Now the second one, negative reinforcement, is what people get confused by. The second point. I use a funny video in my classes from the TV show The Big Bang Theory to illustrate operant conditioning. It's a really funny show, but even there, despite all the research that they do to make these shows, they mess up when it comes to negative reinforcement. You will see that they equate negative reinforcement with punishment, which is completely wrong. Punishment is unpleasant. Negative reinforcement is actually pleasant. Okay. So when we are talking about negative reinforcement, we are talking about removing a negative consequence. So typically, if you get negative consequences for a behavior, and this time we remove that negative consequence, we are not giving you that negative consequence. We are not necessarily giving you a positive consequence, but if we give a positive consequence, then it becomes rewarding, then it becomes positive reinforcement. We are only removing the negative consequence. But removing a negative consequence has a positive effect, right? Negative consequence is unpleasant. So when we remove the negative consequence, it has a positive or pleasant effect on the person. So that's how it strengthens the behavior. It reinforces the behavior. That's the reason it is called negative reinforcement. By removing the negative stimulus, you are reinforcing or strengthening the behavior. So going back to the same example of the child doing math problems on a math worksheet. Let's say after she completes the math problems, she often gets shouted at by her parent or by her teacher. There may be one or two mistakes and she always gets shouted at, right? But this time she wasn't shouted at. She was not punished. Okay, so the negative consequence that she often got is not given to her this time, which then has a positive or pleasant consequential effect on the child. So the child is now working to avoid such negative consequences, and consequently, because she finds the absence of such negative consequences pleasant, that's the reason she is motivated to get all her math problems correct, to work on getting all her math problems correct. So that is an example of negative reinforcement. Hope this was clear. Then we have what we call is extinction, the third category. This is withholding the reward. So after that, you have always been giving rewards, okay, but this time after the person completes the task or engages in the behavior, you are not giving the person a reward anymore, which is then a negative consequence, right? You always got rewards, but this time you are not getting a reward, so you will be unhappy about it. You will not be happy about it. So that is what we mean by extinction. This typically applies to attention-seeking behavior. Many a times children engage in, or not just children, actually adults too, engage in a lot of behavior to seek attention from people. Okay, let's talk actually about the social media. Okay, so let's say you have been getting likes or comments on your posts on, say, Instagram or Facebook, and suddenly you stopped getting those likes. You will not be happy about it, right? Now, initially, you may actually increase that behavior, or you will try to make even more posts so that maybe I'm doing something wrong, so that I will get back those likes and that attention that I was getting before. So typically in extinction, if you see the graph, initially after, so let's say this is the level at which the behavior was happening before, and this is the time point where you introduced extinction. In other words, you stopped giving rewards. So it's not that behavior will drop. It's not going to happen. Rather, what is going to happen is your behavior is going to increase, and then it will lead to a drop. So you will actually start posting even more on your social media, hoping that you will get back all those likes that you are getting. But still, if you continue to not get those likes, those rewards, because people have withheld their likes anymore, right? So then it will lead to you stop doing any of those social media posts. So that is extinction. And finally, we have punishment, which is nothing but giving a negative consequence, unpleasant consequence. That is punishment. Negative consequence in form of a reprimand, in form of some beating. I'm not recommending that you do that, but any form of negative, or in organizational context, it could be firing somebody or demoting somebody. Anyway, all those are examples of punishment. So you can use, from a leader's perspective, you can use both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement to strengthen certain behaviors, and you can use extinction and punishment to weaken the behaviors, the behaviors that you don't want to be happening in your organization or under your leadership. Now let's talk about schedules of reinforcement. In other words, those 4 types of techniques that we talked about: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, extinction, and punishment. When to punish or when to reward? So the schedules of reinforcement answer the when question. So broadly, there are 2 categories when we are talking about schedules of reinforcement. One is continuous reinforcement. So every time the targeted behavior is occurring, you reward or punish, whatever type of reinforcement technique that you are using every time. That is continuous reinforcement. It is very helpful when you are teaching somebody a new behavior. Because every time you are rewarding, the person is motivated to engage in that behavior more and more, and that leads to the person quickly learning that particular behavior. That's what we may even use with dogs, for example. We may reward in the initial part of the training. We will reward the dog every time the dog engages in the desired behavior. So that is continuous reinforcement. Then we have what we call are the intermittent schedules of reinforcement. This time we are not rewarding every time, or if we are talking about the punishment side of the equation, we are not punishing every time. Okay. So intermittent, sometimes we reward, sometimes we don't. And there are 4 different subcategories here, without delving too much into that detail. So fixed ratio is we reward after the person or the animal has engaged in fixed number of, after the animal has engaged in that behavior for fixed number of times. So let's say 5. So after the dog has fetched the ball 5 times, then only I will reward the dog with the treat. After the end of 5 times, then 10th time, then 15th time. Okay, so that is fixed ratio. Fixed interval is what? Fixed interval is I reward after a fixed amount of time. The dog may have performed the behavior once, twice, 5 times, or not even a single time. Okay, but I reward after a fixed interval. Let's say, after 5 minutes. I reward the dog after every 5 minutes, irrespective of how many times the dog has engaged in that behavior. That is fixed interval. Then we have variable ratio. So going back to the dog example of fetching the ball, sometimes I may reward the dog after the dog engaging in that behavior only once. Sometimes I may reward after 5 times, sometimes after 10 times, sometimes after 3 times. So it is variable. It is random. The dog doesn't know when I'm going to reward him again. So that is the variable ratio. And finally, we have the variable interval where the time is varying, not the number of times that the behavior is occurring. So we may sometimes reward after 5 minutes, sometimes after 10 minutes, sometimes after 15 minutes, sometimes after 12 minutes, sometimes after 3 minutes, and you get the idea. Sometimes after 0 minutes, 1 minute, that is the variable interval. So without again going into too much of detail, they have their uses, especially the fixed interval is something that is probably the most common in the workplace. Your basic salary that you get at the end of the month, or maybe for some of you it may be end of couple of weeks, is an example of fixed interval. After every month you get a salary. That is fixed interval, right? Whereas when we are talking about variable ratio or variable interval, we are talking about situations like what may happen on the slot machine, for example. Sometimes you get your rewards money on the very first trial. Sometimes you may not get anything for 20 trials, and then on the 21st trial you may get a lot of money, and so on and so forth. So that is an example of fixed ratio. Typically, we use continuous reinforcement in the initial stages. When we are trying to teach somebody something new, we use continuous reinforcement, and we switch to intermittent schedule, and especially the variable schedule, if we want that behavior to be maintained for a long period of time. Okay, that is in fact one of the reasons why gambling can be so addictive, because the person playing the slot machine or whatever form of gambling doesn't know when that next reward is going to come. So that there is always dopamine in the system. The person is expecting some reward always, and that actually leads to the person compulsively then playing even more and more and more. So that is the variable schedule, variable ratio schedule. Fixed interval may not have as much of motivating effect. If you know that you will get your salary irrespective of how well you perform or how poorly you perform, you know that at the end of every month you will get your salary, then it may not motivate you to excel on your job, right? So anyway, these are some of the important observations that we can make about these different schedules of reinforcement. So now let's combine the reinforcement theory with the need-based theories, because they will give us some great insights about what to reward people with. The need-based theories tell us that different people have different needs. Even the same person has different needs at different points of time. So you should use those things that fulfill people's needs, and that's what they will find rewarding. Clear? So if somebody is operating at basic needs level, then monetary rewards may be something that is the person may find very rewarding. Somebody operating at recognition, esteem level needs. So public praise, recognition would be something that would be very rewarding for that person. That will work great for that person. Somebody who has a high need for autonomy and control would find it rewarding when you provide that person flexibility, discretion, autonomy about how to do things. In fact, giving my personal example, the reason I came into academics, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons was my higher need for autonomy. When I worked in the corporate sector, I did not have as much of autonomy with respect to what I'm working on and how I'm working on those things. But in academics, I decide what I want to research. I decide how I want to research that particular topic. I decide the scale of the research project. I decide how much time I should allocate for that research project. So even with respect to teaching, I have a lot of flexibility with respect to what I want to teach, what I think is most important for my students, and how I teach it. So I did not have that much of autonomy when I worked in the corporate sector. And to me, this was something that I valued. That's the reason I, chose a profession that met that need. So people will have varying levels of needs in different areas. And your job as a leader would be to identify those needs and then reward them accordingly. Some people may have, high need for power. So promotions would matter a lot to them, going to higher positions of hierarchy. To me, it doesn't matter as much. Going from, one rank to other, they are just some meaningless rank to me, but it's not for somebody else. So knowing what need a person has and rewarding them accordingly will help you be more effective when it comes to using or applying the reinforcement theory. And that idea of what to reward people with comes from the insights that you gain from the need-based theories. The next theory that we will discuss is the goal-setting theory. Again, a very simple theory, similar to reinforcement theory. The essence is very simple. Although if you dive deeper, you will realize there are a lot of nuances to the theory that doesn't get addressed in the broad overall perspective of the goal-setting theory. We will try to touch upon some of those nuances, but of course we can't dive too deep because of the constraints within which I am making this presentation. Goal setting theory is also fascinating from a historical perspective because it developed within the field of organizational behavior and social psychology. Some of the pioneering researchers of goal setting theory like Ed Locke, Gary Latham, they were actually researchers working in the field of organizational behavior. Now, this is in stark contrast to the reinforcement theory, for example, where we borrowed the research that had been done in psychology by B.F. Skinner and applied it to the field of organizational behavior and leadership. Okay. So let's go over the goal setting theory. The essence of goal setting theory is that goals have motivating power. Simple. So go ahead, set goals in your life. That will make a big difference to your lives. Because, goals, when you set goals, it gives you a sense of focus. You are now It's directing your attention in a certain direction, which is the goals. You are very focused then. That way you then mobilize your effort to achieving that goal. So it energizes you. Remember those components of motivation that we had talked about, the energizing effect, the direction effect, and the maintenance aspect. So those are the three components of motivation. So the very fact of setting goals energizes you, because again, we are talking about you setting goals, not somebody else setting goals for you. Although that can also be done when you agree with the goals set by the person for you. But especially when you decide on what goals you want to pursue, you are energized. Beginning of the new year, you may set a goal of running a marathon, or losing certain amount of weight, or getting fit, right? And that energizes you to go hit the gym, or eat the right kind of diet in pursuit of achieving that goal. So goals have an energizing effect. Now, of course, we also know from the example of the New Year resolutions that people often do not persist, right? They initially get energized in the direction of achieving the goal, but they often do not persist. So a lot of research in goal setting then gives us some insights about what will help us persist. But one thing is, be very clear in your performance targets. The greater the clarity that you have about what you want to achieve, the easier it is going to be for you to persist towards achievement of that goal. So saying that I want to be the best person I can be, that is very vague. What does that best person I can be mean? It is very vague. I want to be the best possible athlete. Again, what does that mean, best possible athlete? Does it mean running a marathon in 2.5 hours, in 3 hours, in again, if we are talking about say long distance running? Does it mean lifting certain kind of weight? Does it mean doing 250 pounds bench press? Right? We need to be very specific. So anyway, we will talk about SMART goals. So having this clear performance targets is very important, because then we will know whether or not we have achieved those goals, or whether or not we are progressing towards those goals. If it is too vague, then we won't know whether we have achieved it. Also, we won't know whether we are progressing. We can delude ourselves that we are, but we won't know. So having a clear performance target would be very helpful. These are some of the key findings on goal setting. Your goals should be specific as opposed to vague, and I just mentioned that, right? And they also have to be difficult. If they are too easy, they will not motivate you. Again, they should not be too difficult either, which then would make you give up. So they have to be moderately difficult, something that you find challenging, but not something that is too easy or too difficult. Again, remember we discussed this in context of the need for achievement as well. People with high need for achievement tend to set goals that are moderately difficult. So they tend to be difficult and not too difficult or too easy. And when you set goals that are both specific and difficult, we see a higher likelihood of you persisting, higher likelihood of you consistently putting higher effort towards the achievement of that goal. If your goal is too vague, and if your goal is too easy or too difficult, you are likely to not persist. Okay, so that's one thing. The second important aspect is what we call goal commitment. And goal commitment is the determination that you have for getting the goal accomplished. So this is an attitudinal construct, an emotional construct. How determined are you? That will have an influence on whether you will persist or you will give up. It is also related to personality traits. I can mention right now the key personality trait is conscientiousness, which I will discuss in my videos on personality traits. But people with certain personality traits tend to be very committed to the goals that they set. And that's the reason they persist. They don't easily give up. Whereas many others tend to give up very easily. The moment they start getting failures or the moment they reach a plateau where they're not making progress, they give up, right? So that goal commitment is again a big aspect of your success in accomplishing the goals that you want to get accomplished. Another important aspect in goal setting is feedback, the importance of feedback. Now, the feedback may come from another person who could give you feedback about how you are progressing towards your goal, or it could come from the task itself. For example, you may have a mentor, you may have a coach who gives you feedback on how well you are doing, how well you are progressing towards your goal of, let's say, completing a 9-second 100-meter dash, right? How well are you progressing? So your coach will give you feedback, and that will then help you persist towards that goal. If you're not getting that feedback, it is easier to give up. Now, but this feedback need not come from another person. It could come from an instrument, like my watch, my GPS watch can give me feedback on whether my running today was faster than it was last week, right? So it gives me some ideas about whether I'm improving or not. The feedback could come from the very task itself. For example, if you're mountain climbing, you get immediate feedback, right? When you mess up, you fall, right? So, but wherever you are getting that feedback, it becomes easier for you to persist, because you then know where to work on in order for you to be able to achieve the goal. So if there is no feedback, if you are not getting feedback, any feedback either from the task itself or through some instruments or through some person, then the likelihood of you persisting decreases. So some of the key findings in the area of goal setting. Now, elaborating a little further on the goal commitment part that we discussed, one of the reasons why many people fail to achieve their goals is because they are too ambitious when they're setting goals. They set too difficult goals and too many goals too. There is a really nice book by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan called The One Thing. It's an interesting book, easy read. But in there, they argue that you should not be setting goals. Rather, you should be setting one goal. 2 goals is too many. You see, what happens when we are setting goals? Goals help direct our attention in a certain direction, right? Towards that goal. When we are setting 5 different goals, we lose the advantage that comes from setting goals, because now we have 5 different foci. We lose that one, that singular directedness that comes from setting one goal. And when we are setting 5 goals, our attention gets dispersed And if our attention gets dispersed, then we fail to achieve our goals. So what these guys recommend is that, hey, just set one goal, figure out what is the most important thing and set that one goal, achieve it, and then start working on another goal. So it doesn't mean that you can achieve only one thing in life. No. Once you achieve that goal, then you can set another goal, but don't set 5 different goals at the same time. Now, you could argue that they are taking an extreme position, and in some ways, yes. At least, even if you are not comfortable with setting just one goal, hey, how can I choose only one goal? There are so many things that are important, and that's fair. But the lesser the number of goals that you have, the greater will be your commitment to those goals, and the greater will be the likelihood of you actually accomplishing those goals. Otherwise, you can of course feel good about yourself for having set 20 goals and all lofty goals, but it's going to be a futile exercise because it's not going to direct your attention it's not going to help you get that focus, and it will ultimately not help you realize those goals. So at least, again, I'm not saying that you have to set only one goal, but in any area of life, set one primary goal that you're working on. Okay, with respect to your health, anytime that you're working on your health, maybe just have one goal. Don't have the goal of becoming the fastest marathoner, and at the same time the goal of having a physique of like some bodybuilder Arnold Schwarzenegger or at the same time being a great sumo wrestler, and at the same time being a great mixed martial artist. No, it's not going to work. Have just one goal. If you have to choose, if it is marathon, okay, then focus on that. If you want to be a bodybuilder, well, then focus on that. Okay. Even there, of course, you have to be specific, right? What exactly within that area do you want to achieve? Specific, something that can be measured. Similarly, in your another sphere, in the sphere of your work, you could have another goal. Now, say selling, let's say you are in sales, selling 50 cars this month. Arbitrary numbers that I'm giving up here, that I'm throwing here. But so you can have multiple goals, but at least have one primary goal in each of those areas that are important to you. Within each area, do not have 5, 10 different goals, or at the maximum, not have more than 2, 3 goals. 3 would be the upper limit for sure. Now, there are certain individual differences also here that come into play. Some people, because of certain personality traits, they may be attuned to working on multiple goals, and they may be very effective as well. People who tend to be high on the openness dimension of the personality trait are comfortable working on many goals simultaneously. Still, the probability of your achieving the goals becomes higher if you are working on fewer goals, because your goal commitment becomes higher, your focus gets better. So anyway, that's about goal commitment. Okay, so here's the summary slide for the goal setting theory. Some of the key points in goal setting theory. First, of course, is that goals have motivating power. So setting goals is a good thing. It will enhance your motivation, it will increase your focus, it will increase the probability that you will attain those goals. And when you're setting goals, not just any goal, make sure that they are specific. And if I elaborate that further, specific, measurable, right? Specific and measurable, something that is going to help you become more focused. If it is very vague, then it will not help you get focused towards the goal. And you will also not know whether you are progressing towards that goal or not, right? So specific and measurable. If we are talking about the SMART goals, it should be attainable, right? So it should not be too difficult, moderately difficult. So assign difficult goals, but not something that is too difficult, or for that matter, even too easy. Relevant, it needs to be relevant. If you are assigning goals for somebody else, as a leader, if you are assigning goals for somebody else, for your subordinate, for your followers, then the goals need to be something that they feel excited about, that they are, so something that is relevant to them. Only then it will be acceptable to them. Otherwise, they will not be accepting it. They may accept it verbally, but at a psychological commitment level, they would not have accepted those goals. And if they do not accept those goals at a psychological level, they will not be committed to it. And if they will not be committed to it, they will not achieve those goals, right? So, and finally, of course, the time bound aspect. We cannot have uh, goals that have no any time boundations. Are we talking about you achieving, let's say your goal is to earn, say, whatever, $10,000. Are we talking about $10,000 in a month, year, 10 years, uh, 50 years? What are we talking about, right? So we need to be clear also about our timeline. And that's what brings the focus. If that time boundedness is not there, again, it becomes too vague. So assign goals that are difficult, but not too difficult or too easy. Make sure that those goals are psychologically accepted by the subordinates. Otherwise, they will not work. And this is one of the mistakes that many managers do. They say that, hey, I set goals, but somehow it's not working. Hey, but did you ensure that the goals were moderately difficult and something that was accepted, something that was psychologically accepted by the subordinates? If not, then goal setting will not work, irrespective of the general idea that goals have motivating power. Goals have motivating power only when there is goal commitment. Few other things, writing down the goals have a major impact on commitment, on persistence. That is something really interesting about writing. When we physically write things down using pencil and paper, we are not talking about typing things, although even typing things can be better than not writing at all. But having your goals only in your mind is too vague, something that you can easily get out of when you are not making the kind of progress, right? We can rationalize things in our mind, but once you write things down, it becomes something concrete, and you realize when you are not sticking towards the achievement of that goal. So writing your goals down becomes very helpful. And especially in context of writing, you also have to make sure you have to monitor your progress on the goals. You could have check boxes, um, lists that you check off every day that helps you progress towards that goal, or uh, the progress could be monitored by somebody else. We have already talked about it, but monitoring the progress is also very important. When it is by somebody else, it could be in form of feedback, but you yourself also need to monitor your progress, and that will actually enhance your commitment. But one last thing that I would like to mention is the importance of listing obstacles. This is actually some of the most recent research that is happening in the area of goal setting, mostly happened over the last decade or so. But we are finding something very insightful, that when people list the possible obstacles that will come in their way in the process of achieving the goals, they actually become more committed, and the probability that those goals will be achieved also becomes higher. Most people, when they are setting goals, they just set the goals, and maybe at best they will create a plan of action. right? What are the things that they need to do to achieve the goals? Most people do not make a conscious effort to list the possible obstacles that will come in their way of achieving the goals. And that's problematic because research evidence is in support of this fact that when you list the possible obstacles that will come in your way, you have higher commitment, you have higher goal commitment, and you have higher goal achievement. Now, the mechanism through which this happens, of course, can also be discussed, and there are many mechanisms, but some of the key things is that you are better prepared psychologically for those obstacles when you encounter those obstacles. If you hadn't even possibly thought of those possible obstacles, you give up easily when those obstacles come in your way, right? For example, if we are talking about, again, working out 6 times a week to lose certain weight, let's say lose 10 pounds of weight or 20 pounds of weight in 3 months. Let's say that's the goal. What are some of the possible obstacles that will come my way? Hey, I may not feel motivated to work out. I may not feel motivated to go to the gym. I may, maybe the weather is going to be cold and I will not be feeling like getting out of my bed and going into the cold. Maybe I will be busy with certain workplace projects due to which I will not be able to devote the kind of time that I need to devote for this physical fitness exercises. What are some of the other possible obstacles? Maybe, I will be spending time partying at night, which will make me wake up late, which will then mess up my routine, and I will not be able to go to gym on time. So when I think of all of these possible obstacles and actually list them down, writing, remember, that will actually help me prepare for these, how to deal with these possible obstacles. Then I could have a plan of actions for all of these possible obstacles. Even if I'm not creating plan of action for each of these possible obstacles, the fact that I just am aware of those obstacles will reduce the probability of I encountering those obstacles, and will reduce, because hey, then I will avoid partying late into the night so that I can go to the gym in the morning, right? So I can avoid many of those obstacles if I list those down. But if I don't list those down, what's going to happen? I was not thinking about my going to the gym while I was partying, but what happened is I wake up late, I miss going to the gym, and then I feel, oh, I have already missed my streak of going to the gym regularly. So you give up, right? So these are some of the things to keep in mind, which will keep you motivated towards achieving your goals. Now let's talk about some of the limitations of the reinforcement theories before we conclude this video. Because yes, there is a lot of evidence of reinforcement techniques like rewards and punishments working, but they do not work always. There are certain times when they do not work to motivate people to work towards attainment of the goals. So when do they work? When do they not work? What does research tell us about the limitations of the reinforcement theories? We will discuss this briefly. Okay. To illustrate the limitations of the reinforcement approach, we will discuss the candle problem, the famous candle problem. This is a puzzle that was developed by researchers at Harvard University way back in the 1940s. And later on, researchers working on reinforcement used this problem to study the effects of reinforcement. Okay, so on performance, on motivation and performance. But in any case, what is the problem? If you have heard of this problem before, of course, you know But if you haven't heard of this problem, I want you to listen to the description of the problem, then pause the video, try to work out the solution to the problem, then listen to the solution, actual solution of the problem, and compare your solution with the actual solution of the problem. In any case, the problem is straightforward. You have a candle, some safety matches, and a box full of thumbtacks. Your job is to burn the candle, fix it on the wall in such a way that none of the melting wax falls on the floor, or in this case, the table. How will you do that? You can pause the video here before you listen to the actual solution to the problem. So people try different combinations when they are thinking of solving the problem. They try to say burn the lower end of the candle and try to fix it on the wall. They try all kinds of combinations. They try to use the thumbtacks to fix the candle onto the wall. None of those solutions will work because of basic physics, which I won't elaborate. So the actual solution is that you use the thumbtacks to fix the box to the wall and then light the candle and place the burning candle on the box. So all the molten wax will fall on the box and not on the floor or the table, right? This is the problem. This is the solution. It's not a very complicated problem. If you give yourself enough time, all of you will be able to solve it, or most of you would be able to solve it. Some will be able to get the solution in a few seconds, some may get it in a minute or two, some may need 5 minutes, but hey, most of you will be able to solve the problem. As I was telling you, researchers in the field of working on reinforcement have also used this problem. So what do? In one of the studies, they divide the study participants into two separate groups. Randomly divide them into two separate groups. One group, for the first group, each of those participants are given this problem that I just showed you, given this problem, and they are said that we are trying to find out what is the average time that people take to solve this problem. Try to do your best and try to solve it as fast as you can. Okay. The second group was given different instruction. The second group, again, but participants within that group are being tested individually. So the second group was told something different. They are told that we are holding this competition of how fast you can solve this problem. If you are amongst the top 10 percentile of the performers in terms of how fast you can solve this problem, then we'll give you $20. Okay, so then here you have a goal of performing really fast, and if you do, then do fall within that top 10 percentile, then you earn $20. So which group do you think performs faster? The group that was told to do as best as you can, or the group that is promised a reward for high performance? You can pause and think of which group would perform better. It turns out the second group, which was given the target of performing fast and earning money, performed poorly or poorer or slower than the group that was given the vague goal of doing your best. Okay, doing your fastest as you can. Now, this is a little strange, right? Different from what I have been discussing. How is this happening? Isn't the fixed specific goal and the promise of reward lead to higher performance, lead to higher motivation and higher performance? It's true, but this is an example of certain situations where rewards may not work the way we expect them to work. Because you see, this is not a straightforward 2 plus 2 equals 4, 3 plus 3 equals 6 kind of problem. This is a problem that requires a little bit of creative thinking or insightful thinking. And when you are giving monetary rewards, promising monetary rewards, you are putting a lot of pressure, and that stress actually inhibits you from thinking creatively, and which ultimately leads to you performing poorly or you taking longer to solve this problem. So rewards do work well, but they may sometimes inhibit performance, especially when those tasks involve creative kind of problem solving or some complex problem solving. That's when rewards may actually hinder performance. And how do we know this? Because there is a variation to this problem where the materials are presented this way, where the tags are outside the box as opposed to inside the box. And when the materials are presented this way, the problem is easy, because now you do not have that functional fixedness of, now you can think, oh, this is the box is another tool that you could use to solve the problem. When the tags were inside the box, you thought of the box as a receptacle for the thumbtacks. You didn't think that you could use the box also for the solution, right? So when the problem is presented this way, it is relatively easy, or rather fairly easy. So the researchers actually did a variation of the same experiment. Again, they divided the participants into two groups. Okay, one group was told, so in this case the problem is being presented this way, and one group is told that do your best, and the second group is promised a reward. If you are among the top 10 percentile, you get $20. Yeah? Good amount of money for just 5-10 minutes of work, right? So plus you get the recognition of earning $20 for being the fastest. So it's a good reward. Now the opposite thing happened. The group that was promised reward actually performed faster than the group that was asked to do their best, do their fastest. When problems are simple, when problems are simple, straightforward, does not involve too much of complex problem solving, too much of creative problem solving, rewards can actually have a beneficial effect of enhancing performance. So this is something that we are starting to recognize in the field, that rewards do not always have a positive impact on performance, on goal attainment. Rewards tend to help a lot, especially when the tasks are relatively easy, relatively mundane, relatively straightforward. But when they become complex, they can have negative impact on performance. Here's some of the statements from Dan Ariely's research paper that was published in 2005. They conducted studies, 9 different experiments in different locations, some in US, some in India, and this is what they conclude. As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. So when tasks were simple, straightforward, higher reward led to higher performance. But once the task involved even rudimentary cognitive skill, they're being a little hard here, but essentially what they're saying is once the tasks involved complex problem solving, cognitive thinking, creative thinking, or complex problem solving, the larger reward led to poorer performance. In 8 of the 9 tasks we examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance. So that's what we see about how rewards can even have a negative impact on performance. So rewards do have positive impact on performance, but when the tasks tend to be more easy, more straightforward. But when the tasks are complex, they can sometimes have negative or poor result in poor performance. Now, this does not mean that I am saying that you should not reward people or should not promise rewards to people who are working on creative projects, because the results are a little bit more complex or than what we just saw in those two experiments. So these are some results from different meta-analytic studies. So Desai's result that was published in 1999, meta-analytic study of 128 experiments, did show that extrinsic rewards or incentives can undermine performance when people are working on those complex creative kind of tasks. But some of the later studies, like a study done on 2000 employees by Cho and Perry in 2012, show that yes, intrinsic reward, the intrinsically motivated to work on something as opposed to extrinsic reward, which is you getting external rewards. Both matter. Extrinsic rewards also have a positive impact on performance, so both can actually help. And the correlation between money and satisfaction is pretty low. We have discussed this, of course, also in our discussion on job satisfaction. So the results are a little bit complex. But what I would say is you should at least be mindful of some of these things when you are rewarding people. Do not at least overemphasize the reward aspect, the extrinsic rewards, when you are trying to get your people motivated to work on creative tasks or complex problem solving kind of tasks. And you will realize the wisdom of this advice when we discuss some theories also, like the transformational theory of leadership later on. These are some more studies and more recent studies, 2014 papers on different meta-analytic studies, all showing that incentives work. It's not that they do not work, but one needs to understand. I think the best way to explain is this discussion that we had on power. Generally, we know that referent power is more effective than reward power, right? Reward power is a position power, whereas referent power is intrinsic, internal personal power. But we also know that reward power can enhance referent power, right? So things are a little bit more complex. So the point is not that you should not use rewards, but that you should be a little bit more mindful about when and how to use rewards. And if you are, then you will be more successful in the usage of incentives to motivate your employees, to motivate your subordinates. And the same thing also applies in the punishment direction, actually, and there are some interesting studies there as well, but we won't delve into that in this lecture. We will stop the lecture here since we have already crossed the 1 hour mark. A key thing to remember though is rewards are a great way to motivate people, but we also need to take into account intrinsic motivation, how to get people motivated not just because they are working towards attainment of some external rewards, but how to get them excited about the work that they are doing, the work itself. And that's what we also should think about. And this is a topic that we will discuss in the next video, some of the theories of intrinsic motivation.